Okay, now that we've saved everything correctly, let's hop on over to the project window again. The project window is listing that we have a composition. Well, you can open this up a little and get the info for it. The project window says we have a composition in it. And the composition is open down in the timeline frame, but there's nothing there. So what to do? Well, first of all, we like to stay organized. So let's mouse on down to the bottom left corner. We have three buttons here: interpret footage, create new folder, and create new composition. You already know how to create a new composition through the menu drop down. Skip that. So you already know how to make a new composition through the composition drop-down window, composition, new composition, or Command N. Here they just give you a really easy button with one click to be able to do it. Ta-da! And we've already gone through this, so that's just another way to create a new composition. Maybe I'll just create a new composition just to show you what it's going to look like in the project window. We'll call this one test comp 1. Should save the settings that you changed for your last composition. Hit OK. So now in the project window we have two separate compositions. Okay, what do we do? Let's go down to this button down here in the middle and create a new folder. If you're familiar with editing programs, these are like bins. After Effects calls them folders. So click it and give it a name. We're going to call this one Test Assets. Hit Enter. Okay. So it's empty. There's nothing there. We need something to bring into After Effects. Alright, let's hop on over to Google Image Search. And what should we search for? How about unicorns? If you're not familiar with Google Image Search, it's really cool. You can just search for images. Okay, I'm just going to pick one out here. Ooh, that one's scary. This one looks pretty good. Google will tell you when you mouse over it the size in pixels of the image, so it's big. We have nice resolution. So you can just click on it and then wait for it to load. As you'll see under here, it's got a loading bar. There we go. It's fully downloaded. Right click on it. Save image as. And we will call it unicorn. We'll put it in our desktop, Art3550, practicing. Okay, it's saved. Let's go back to After Effects. You can switch between open programs on your Mac by hitting Command Tab, and it will cycle through all the different programs you have open. It's a quick and easy shortcut. So now we need to load our unicorn picture. So how do we do that? Let's go to File, Import, File. It's going to ask us where to look. So since we're so organized, we know exactly where it is. It's on the desktop, Art3550, practicing. There it is, unicorn. And hit open. Okay. Now, along with our two compositions and our folder, we've got a unicorn JPEG in the project window. Let's click and drag that into the test assets just to make things organized. And you can close and open the bin if you so desire. Alright, So how do we work with this file? What do we do with it? Well, all you have to do is click on the file and drag it down into the timeline. Ba-boom. And now you have imported your first image into After Effects. And you can tell it's on the timeline by the fact that the file name or source name of the image is here, and that in the timeline we have a solid colored bar. Now that we're still down in the timeline window, let's take a look at this window's particular features. Okay, the first thing you'll notice is the name of any asset that you've brought in. Okay, this is our unicorn JPEG. We'll jump on over here to the current time indicator, and you can click and drag this, and you'll notice as you're clicking and dragging the numbers, the numbers above here in the preview time change. So it's now at 1 second 20 frames, it's now at 4 seconds 20 frames. Perfect for our unicorn image. So you can navigate through the timeline by clicking and dragging. You can also zoom in and out. So as I zoom in, you'll notice that the time intervals are decreasing until the point where I can zoom in all the way, and now I'm just looking at frames. And this will be really helpful in a little while. I'm going to zoom back out. Now, as I look at my timeline, I can tell that my timeline is 10 seconds long. So to make this a little more helpful, let's add our first little change in After Effects to our image. So this is our image. This is our unicorn image. Here's the visual representation of it, and here is the information of that image represented in the timeline. And if you mouse over, you'll see this little triangle here. Pop that open. Boink. And you see we have a menu underneath it. It says Transform. Ooh, this is getting interesting. Open that up. Whoa, look at all these options. This is where you can change some of the basic attributes of your image. Anchor point, which is the center fulcrum, if you will, of which things will rotate and move around. We'll get to that later. This is where you'll be able to zoom in and out of the composition itself. It's like stepping away from your painting easel. When you do that, the canvas appears to be smaller, and then you see more of the background behind it. So the zoom level is how you can focus on and frame your composition. Let's try and get our image to match the size of our canvas. And why aren't we seeing the whole image? How do we solve this? Well, let's zoom out just a little bit. Let's go to around 33%. Okay, now use your mouse wheel to zoom in and out of the composition window as well. That will give you a broader view of your composition and image within the composition. So it looks like the image is too big for the composition. Uh-oh, what should we do? Let's head on down to our timeline and select the scale attribute. Here we can increase or decrease the size of our image. You can make it teeny tiny. You can make it super huge. Let's find something in the middle where we can see the entirety of the image. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, if you want to get an exact measurement, if you want to get really exact, After Effects lets you type in the numbers of the transformation so you don't have to use trial and error to wiggle it around with your wrist. So let's say we'll make this 25%. Hit enter, and it's perfectly sized now, 25% its original size. Now what else can we do with it? Now let's go back down here to our magnification ratio pop-up and select fit up to 100. Now it's going to frame the entire composition within our viewing window at 100%, even if we shrink the window or make it bigger. Very handy. So let's pop on down to the timeline window again and explore what these transformation nodes do. We've looked at scale. What do you think rotation does? Yes, you guessed it right. It rotates the image. Whee! And like the scale tool, you can type in exactly the angle of where you would like your image. So if you want it back to where it began, you just hit 0. If you want it to make a half rotation, you type in 180. Or you can have fun with it by clicking and dragging the numbers back and forth, and it gives you an instant animated preview. Actually, let's put it back to its original rotation position. I said we were going to come back to the anchor point. Well, it's anchor point time. The anchor point is the central axis of an asset. And so you noticed before, if I rotate it, it's going to rotate around that center point. So what if I don't want this to rotate from the middle, and I wanted it to say rotate from a corner instead? Well, what you do is you mouse on up here to your tools, and this is called the pan behind tool. Select that, come down to your composition window, and you can see the anchor point. There's going to be an anchor point on every asset you bring into After Effects. So with the pan behind tool active, click and drag. So now when I rotate the image, its rotation is in the corner. Chop, chop. I'll do that one more time, just for giggles. So we've got the pan behind tool active. I'm going to grab the anchor point, and let's say I want it to rotate around the unicorn's eye. So I move the anchor point to its eye. Whoa! And that's how you change the rotational axis of an image. And now let's look at opacity. You can have the opacity at 100%, so it's completely opaque image, or you can lower the opacity and it becomes transparent. Whoa! Okay, so this is a really good time to save our project. Even though we've got it set to autosave, we're going to want to save this project ourselves. And I'm going to do it in an iterative style, or I'm going to make an iteration of the project. So what I mean by that is going to File, Save As, okay. Now, our first file that we've saved was called Playing Around. And if we save it again with the same name, it'll overwrite it. So let's call this Playing Around 02. Save. Now if you navigate to the Finder, go into our folder, go into Practicing, you'll see that there are now two versions of Playing Around. Our original one and our latest version. Our latest version contains all the changes we made since saving the first one. So this is a really good way to save things. So if you make an error that is irrecoverable, you can always step backwards through your project history. And now the moment you've all been waiting for. Let's use After Effects to make some animation. What I want to do is move our lovely unicorn from the right side of the screen to the left side of the screen. How to accomplish that? Well, let's mouse on down to the timeline, activate the window. When a window is active in After Effects, it'll have that light blue thin edging around it. And then simply press the letter P. There are certain hotkeys for transformations that'll become really handy for you. In fact, let me just go through the few. If I just wanted to do it one at a time, I could just hit a single letter. Position, scale, rotation. And then if I want all of them together, I activate the first one. So opacity is T for transparency. Hold down the Shift key, R rotation, P position. Easy as ABC. So let's make this thing move. Okay, let's head on up to the composition window and click and activate it. Now, as you can see, the little icon on my mouse says I'm using the pan behind tool. You only want to use that tool to move your anchor points. So let's switch to the main pointer tool, which is V. There. Accordingly, you can select it from this toolbar at the top. I highly recommend learning the hotkeys, as it'll make using and working through After Effects so much smoother for you. Back to the composition window, I am going to zoom out of my composition. So I'm going to just roll my mouse wheel back, and that puts my magnification of my composition at 25%. So I've got all this blank space around here. You can use this blank area as staging or scratch. After Effects will not render anything outside of the composition. So let's do this. Let's make sure that our pointer tool is selected. Click and drag on our unicorn. Let's move it off to the side. Now, as you move it off the composition, you'll notice the image disappears, but you'll be able to see the outline of it. And now we're going to go down to our timeline. This is where all the animation information is going to be stored and accessed. So right now we're just concerned with the position of this asset. So I'm just going to hit P. Now let's take a look at what's going on with our transformers. All our transformers have disappeared. There's a strange feature or bug in After Effects that if you have multiple transformers open and you hit the corresponding letter for that transformer, it'll collapse all the transformers. I'm not sure why. So we're only interested in position, so let's hit P, bringing up the position transformer. Now, let's take a look at what's under here. We have a little stopwatch. We have the name of our transformer we're using. And here under mode, this is to select different compositing modes. We're not going to be using this too much, but if you want to play around with it, go ahead and try some of the different compositing modes once you have multiple assets in the composition. Okay. We have track matte. We're not going to worry about that right now. Parent and links, we're going to get to that later too. What that is going to do is parent one asset to another. So if you move one asset, both of them move. Over on the left here, we have a couple of helpful icons. The first one is the eyeball. It's the very same principle in Photoshop as it is in After Effects. You can turn the visibility of an asset on or off. We're not using audio, so that is blank. That will turn the audio track on and off. This is the solo button, so if you're familiar with audio editing, it will just make everything else invisible except the track you're working on. Now, since we don't have multiple assets open, I'll have to show you that later. The lock button is also helpful. So once you're done animating and you don't want to accidentally make any mistakes, you can lock the layer down, and then you won't be able to affect the asset at all. It'll be protected and locked. We want to keep that open for now. This is a mistake commonly made by people just getting into it. If their asset is locked and they can't move anything around, they'll lose their minds and freak out. Don't freak out, just uncheck it. Okay, and we also have labels. We can click this little colored square and select a color for our asset. It's not going to affect what we see in the composition. It only adds a color to the asset in the timeline. So let's randomly pink one. Okay, let's do pink. There, see how that changed? And if you, for some reason, wanted a yellow, or blue, or orange, I like orange. Let's stick with that one. It'll also help you differentiate your assets. So the first thing I'm going to do is use my pointer tool and grab our asset and bring it back onto our composition. I'm just going to keep it on the right hand side here. Now, this is the magic moment you've all been waiting for, animation. So how do you make animation? Well, After Effects uses a system called keyframing. The computer needs to know where the asset starts and where it's going to end. So I'm going to tell After Effects that I want my asset to start in this position. So I have to add a keyframe. And I'm telling the computer that in time, my asset starts here. Now, you'll notice something happened. This little diamond shape showed up. Okay? What that means is there's a keyframe now on the timeline. You won't see any movement with just one keyframe. So, you may be thinking to yourself, how does it move? Well, you need a second keyframe. So let's move the time indicator down our timeline to, let's say, 3 seconds. Okay? And we're going to grab our asset and move it to the other side of the screen. Whoa! Ta-da! We want to start with the position on the right, and then as time increases, we want to change the position to the object moving left. And then when you scroll, your very first animation.